We at OpenAI noticed that like virtually everyone at the company is using the Codex app. And Germany is actually one of the top 5 markets in the world for Codex momentum.
Germany?
Yeah. Those models are so good that we're still too shy with them. We're still not using them to the maximum of their abilities. It's very likely it could work for like 1 day, 2 days, maybe 3 days or more, completely uninterrupted, and come back to you with like, I'm done. Everything is up to date and I tested everything.
Wir sind mit dem ganzen Podcast-Team nach Paris gefahren und geflogen für diesen Podcast. Wir haben die Möglichkeit, mit Romain von OpenAI, der die Codex-App verantwortet, zu sprechen. Die Codex-App ist momentan eine der heißesten Anwendungen, wenn es um AI-Harnesses geht, also Agent-Harnesses, Sachen, die man machen muss, um Agents zu steuern. Das ist der heiße Scheiß momentan, wenn es um KI geht. Ihr bekommt hier bei AI to the DNA wirklich mal einen Blick von Tooltourismus hin zu Champions League, denn ihr seht jetzt, wie OpenAI selbst intern diese Super-App nutzt, die mittlerweile von über 4 Millionen Weekly-Users genutzt werden. Und das hat sich innerhalb der letzten Wochen verzehnfacht in Deutschland. Das heißt, wir haben es hier wirklich in den frühen Stunden mit einer neuen heißen Anwendung zu tun. Und ihr könnt jetzt dabei sein. Freut euch auf ein Deep Dive aus Paris, OpenAI Codex bei AI to the DNA. I ask you to say the typical sentence, even if I'm the host, because this is what everyone knows from you from YouTube. What's what you usually say?
I usually say something like, hey everyone, I'm Romain from OpenAI.
From OpenAI.
Indeed.
Romain, welcome to the podcast. We're in Paris at your office. And you're not only from OpenAI, you're one of the key people behind Codex. And that's what I want to chat with you about today.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you, Christoph, for having me. And thank you for making the trip to Paris, too.
Very, very welcome. We had a very nice sightseeing tour last night. I took the team and said, like, okay, we at least have to do some walk around the city. So it's very beautiful. And it was a good start.
That's awesome.
The goal for this podcast for me is always to like take people along and explain them that we don't want to be tool tourists jumping from tool to tool, but more becoming like really more like a Champions League player when it comes to tools. And I want to challenge you right away with that. I made the first video about Codex last May. And that was when Codex was not an app, but like a tool you were using internally. And I tried it and I was like, it didn't work the way I wanted it. Then I opened, when you released the app, the Codex app again, used it with the model, I think 5.2 and then 5.3 Codex. I was like, okay, this is working now. That was kind of the same moment I had with Claude in December, November. And then I realized with GPT 5.5, holy smokes, this is really working now. How it is that Codex is not just a better IDE for developers, but now changing into a new layer of work. Is that planned or did it just happen?
Well, I think it's a great observation, by the way. We thought about like coding for a long time, right? I think even the name Codex at OpenAI goes back like 6 years now, when the first like models were able to output code. And when we started like this new generation of like Codex product a year ago, we always had this vision of like agentic coding taking place like in the cloud, like agentic delegation with agents being able to write code. The reality is that the models were not quite good enough at the time. You could still do like pair programming, which was very popular in 2025. The idea of having an AI that you can like talk to for like architectural questions, maybe like writing some files or some functions. But you could not really delegate complex like features to build from scratch, or like let alone a complex refactoring of a code base. And now we're there. So we really made like strong progress on our stack of models. And as you pointed out, I think 5.2 and 5.3 Codex were the models that had the turning point. Well, like I could even see the very best engineers at OpenAI late last year were still writing some code. And as of 5.2 and then GPT 5.3 Codex, this is the moment they realized that the models were so good that they did not have to write any code by hand either. And so that's when we really started to manifest this agentic coding, the model being able to take on very, very long tasks. It could be like a 5-minute task, but it could be like a 5-hour task, or even like days of work uninterrupted. And as such, we also realized that well, the interface we've been using to write code is no longer the correct one, right? Because if you're pair programming in an IDE, it makes sense because you're talking to the model, you're outputting a function, and you're kind of like in the flow. But if you start delegating tasks to a model that you really trust to do the right thing for like many hours at once, like what we saw last year was like terminal-based interfaces where you have like 10 or 12 tabs in your terminal, and each of those agents is trying to get your attention at some point. We knew we had to build something better for this new world of like delegating to agents, and that's how the Codex app came to be. It was really this realization that like the models had become so good that we needed to have like a command center to be able to like not just delegate tasks to agent, but also give them the right permissions, review their work, and really like be in the seat of a manager of agents, if you will.
The command center is a much better word. I used the word agent inbox last year to explain it, and it was very early days. And a lot of people in my company were so afraid of using the terminal because, like, we have psychologists at Blackboat, we have consultants, enablement people who do enablement, and they were like, "Do I need to write code now?" So, what if you need to describe in a typical, let's say, German corporate company or Mittelstand Codex to someone who knows ChatGPT and says, well, I have ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT, what should I do with Codex? Because I don't write code. And you're not allowed to use the word code. You have to describe it in a work way to them.
Yeah. I think like if they've been used to ChatGPT, the great news is that they've already mastered the first step of like, oh, I can talk to an AI, and this model is very smart and it's able to actually have a very personalized response for me. And maybe if they've used ChatGPT before, they may have connected their calendar or they may have connected with their Gmail. So they've had that personalization and that experience so far. What is very magical with the Codex app for literally anyone now is that you have not just access to all of the services that you have online, but also with the right safeguards, of course, and approvals, you also have access to your computer. And what that means now is that any kind of everyday task that you do on a computer, the Codex app is able to do it for you. So for some people, that's writing code, and that's where we started. But for some others, that's like, well, I have presentations to make every time I meet a new prospect or a customer. Or maybe it's like I work in finance and I'm manipulating Excel sheets every day. Or maybe it's like, I'm working in recruiting and I need to have like a pipeline of candidates. That's triage. Like all of these things are actually tasks that we all do on a computer. And most of them take time. They usually connect data sources from multiple places. They try to visualize things. There are actions to click on. And then you realize that like something like Codex, which was initially made for coding, can be unlocking all of that and really give you like more power and like higher productivity for what you're trying to accomplish.
I'm always trying to not to overhype apps unless I have a strong feeling. And I'm a heavy user, I would say, but you can challenge me on that one, what a heavy user defines. But I observed throughout the last weeks before the podcast, usually the first app I open in the morning is Codex, also to prepare the podcast. So I have a very neat presentation ready on the phone. It's made on the Blackboat design. So people listening to the podcast now, they cannot see it, but where is it? I show it later on YouTube. So it even uses the Blackboat design
Very cool.
that we have. Even day mode, night mode, you can switch and do all the stuff. And to me, the question is, since you are so strong when it comes to product, I mean, the job that you had before OpenAI was more developer related, using the API. But my feeling is, and help me to understand it better, is that you're a very deep product person. At the same time, you're a very deep engineering person, and this is how you bring this product to life. Is this the way you work on that on the app, or is it more testing, experimenting? How do you work on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think like the Codex team is very much like iterating quickly, like it's part of the culture of that team, like building quickly, but also iterating quickly based on user feedback. So you might have seen many of us on X, every single day trying to engage with developers, with builders of any kind. And by the way, I think that's what I love about Codex. It's the idea that like everyone is a builder, and maybe that's another way to like
Describe
have a shorter description to your previous question, which is like how would you describe Codex to anyone when now anyone can build, and build can mean many things. For engineers, it means like building apps or products, but for everyone else, it could be like you're building something that
actually
relates to your work. That's very exciting. Things that were usually limited. So like, I need to have access to an engineer to do this thing. Well, now you can. And so the way we iterate on the Codex app is very much like on one side, benefiting from all of this feedback from the users that we talk to every day, but also on the other side, trying to manifest the capabilities of the models that are changing so quickly, right? It used to take us more than a year to build a new model at OpenAI, and you've seen the pace of change recently, right? Like now, on average, I believe since GPT-5 and 5.1, I think it's been like a model every 5 weeks. That's the pace now. And those models, you've noticed yourself, like when we went from 5.4 to 5.5 in 5 weeks also, these are not just like incremental tiny changes. Like for some people, they've seen like, wow, I've noticed like glimpses of AGI there. Like I'm noticing something that no other model was able to do before. And so we're trying to see like how can we manifest these features into Codex, while at the same time talking to users on the other side. And by the way, the reason why we try to make it so much better on everyday work is because we at OpenAI noticed that like virtually everyone at the company is using the Codex app day in, day out. It went quite quickly, far beyond the engineering team. And so we noticed there was something there, right? When our CFO, for instance, Sarah Fryer, is using Codex nonstop. And I'm like, she's mastering like her, how we do finances and Excel and all of that, like on Codex. And I'm like, there's surely something here for others to also benefit from.
Do you train other teams, or is it just happening one-on-one in the kitchen?
I think there's a bit of both. Like we do some enablement, but I think it's like the natural curiosity. Of course, like we have an edge where like when you have like Codex teammates at the company, we often refer to each other as like we're Codex build, like how passionate we are about Codex. It's very often, if you walk around like OpenAI HQ, that every few minutes you would hear something like, just ask Codex. If someone has like a crazy idea of a very complex task, be like, have you asked Codex? Yeah, let me ask Codex. And you would overhear that quite often. And so I think no matter which team you're on, we try to kind of blend people as much as we can. That's why we have a strong like in-person culture at the office. So we're naturally well equipped to get everyone on board,
When I have the feeling for a new software or tool, like back in the day, I mentioned Salesforce, for example. We had the same in the company. I always said, like, take a look in Salesforce. Is there something so we don't need to talk? Or then later with Slack. And you see that people change the behavior. What I see now as a challenge, and I want to disconnect it a little bit from the tool, is that the way we used to work from the ChatGPT moment in terms of chat, answer, to delegating jobs to agents and then to coordinate an agent harness is by far more complex and more challenging. What would you explain to someone who says, like, help me to understand the difference between a pure chatbot and a harness, no matter if it's Codex or any other harness, and why it's so important to have a close look into these harnesses, also for companies to be prepared for the next years coming?
Right. I think if you rewind like a couple years, right, when people were starting to deploy ChatGPT and chatbots at scale, if you remember the conversations at the time, they were like, oh, does the model hallucinate? Does it have enough in the training data to help my company? Or I should probably do like RAG in order to like get my documents and my context into the flow of the conversations. These were kind of the main questions at the time. What's very fascinating now is that thanks to reasoning progress first, the model has been able to call tools. And so when it's able to call tools, it's able to like look up something on the internet. It's able to look up something in one of your data like sources within a company. And all of that, as we mastered and polished it over time, we refer to it as the kind of harness of the model. So it's the idea that like maybe 2 years ago, the battle was on the model layer and we would just like get higher and higher intelligence at every step of the way. Now, when you look at a model like GPT 5.5, the intelligence is extremely high. I would even say that like GPT 5.5 is already smarter than me and like most of us at OpenAI. But what makes the difference between GPT 5.5 being a good employee versus like someone else within the company, it's really like how much context does it have on how to do the job correctly? How much access does it have to the context of all the documents we've written, the conversation with customers, the code base we have, the conventions we have in place, things like that. And so all of that refers to the harness. It's the idea that like, okay, there's the model layer, but on top of that, there is the environment that the model lives in. The list of tools it's able to call to, whether it's like read a file, write a file, whether it's like connecting to like the web for a search, connecting to my data sets. And all of that harness, I think, is what matters when you want to really manifest this like agentic capability of the model. Not just doing a task, writing code or writing a document, but the ability to cross-check with multiple sources and check its own work. So for instance, in the case of writing code, what makes the model so good, it's like, okay, I'm gonna write some code, but I'm gonna test that code. In fact, better yet, I'm gonna open it in the browser, I'm gonna take a screenshot of what I've done, I'm gonna make sure it complies with the design, for instance. Well, no, not quite yet. Okay, let me go back to it, let me edit this piece of code, let me recheck again. All of that, we essentially refer to the harness, the ability to have a model, its environment, its tools, and all of that. And so to me, that's where really we push the frontier with a model like GPT 5.5. And that's why when it comes to models and Codex, that's why we also wanted to like have a great foundation and make sure that, like ChatGPT itself, for instance, is now benefiting from that Codex harness already. The new agents we're building within ChatGPT are on top of the Codex harness. And what I find very compelling as a developer is that we open source all of this. So the Codex CLI, so the interface in the terminal, that's open source. But this Codex harness that I refer to, that's also open source.
Oh, wow.
And the Codex app server also connecting that harness to our API is also open source. And I think that's quite unique. And I think, frankly, we don't talk like enough about this.
I shared it a couple of times, but I think many people don't realize that most of the other big players are closed source, unless something leaks. Then it's also open source, but well, that's not planned then. And you open source it. You also shared last year the model instructions in parts of it. I think not everything, because when you refer to the harness coordinating stuff, I think many of the things in the background are related to simple prompts, getting more complex if it's many prompts, right?
Yep.
Is it something you can also like get a glimpse into, or is this pure secret how you do it?
No, I think like what's very interesting now that you have this harness layer and the models becoming like so smart. So we bring now back into the training the harness as well. So like now that we have this like open source harness that people can introspect and they can see like what kind of tools do we have in there, how the things connect together. We also bring this back into the training, so the model is even better when we have this like reinforcement learning techniques where the model gets a reward for achieving a task. We also do so with the right like harness in place, so we get even better gains. But to your point on prompts, I think what I find fascinating now is how much, even just a year ago, we were still talking so much about prompting techniques or prompt engineering guidance. You know, if you wanted to get the best out of the model, usually you had to kind of prompt the model a certain way. I remember even in the early days of coding, we would even say like, oh, you are a staff senior engineer, very high IQ, and as such, you may notice differences in how the code is written. All of that is really gone. What I love about the models to date is that there's even less to learn to use them versus a year ago, and yet they are so much more powerful. When people ask me like, oh, can I do this thing with Codex? I'm like, Sure can. Like, just talk to Codex the exact same way you just talk to me. All of the same words. You don't even have to have your prompt perfectly written. Because the models are so smart, we don't have to give them, as much like care in the prompting, So yeah, I think that's very cool. And I think we have other parts of the Codex like suite where we sometimes have a very specific prompt. So for instance, when we put Codex in the form of code review is really, really powerful with Codex because it's able to find bugs or vulnerabilities and things like that. Well, for this, we give Codex a very specific prompt. Like, your job is to go after like what could potentially be a bug and how to stack rank them and how to give feedback on these bugs. And so by giving the model this different personality, it can behave differently. But as you talk to Codex for your everyday work, what I find magical is like I barely type anymore. I just dictate to Codex. And that's my prompt. And oftentimes people are surprised by this, especially if they're still in the kind of ChatGPT mode of thinking. But like when I start talking to Codex, I don't even know where I'm going to end up sometimes. I'm just brainstorming out loud. I might change my mind a couple times over the course of that minute where I'm still talking to Codex for what I'm trying to accomplish. And yet I trust Codex to figure it out. So.
And it's how would you describe the percentage of, is it 30% or 40% model intelligence and then 60% the smart ways of routing through different prompts in the system prompt? Or how would you?
I think it's like part model intelligence, part context. I think like it's really the context of like being able to access these tools, right? Like if it's let's say if it's a coding task, and if I'm asking like Codex to like build a new feature or like completely change the behavior of an existing part of my app, like the intelligence of the model is pretty high, of course. But I think what matters is like, all right, the user is asking me something here. Let me look at the entire code base. Let me piece things together. Okay, I understand how the whole system works. The user is asking me to build this new feature, but I saw over there that they had a design system. So sure enough, I can probably reuse these components over here and bring them over there. Like that understanding of the whole picture by being able to read your files, connect your context. Same thing if it's like a kind of like a knowledge task almost. If I'm asking like, hey, you're going to be my chief of staff every morning at 7 a.m., I want to have a report of everything that matters to me. All the emails I should be answering to first thing in the morning. I also want you to draft the response because you know my style of writing. You've seen me write before. You know what matters to me. We've talked enough about these documents and what matters for this coming quarter. These are my priorities. And based on all of that, the model will come up with something quite magical. And of course, it's part intelligence because the model is smart, but it really comes down to this context, right? Like the ability to connect to all of these tools to know what really matters to Christoph versus like the raw IQ of the model.
And this is something that I'm observing a lot. And I was asking, I think pretty much since the video last year, like how would we organize the data internally? And I really brainstormed a lot about it. And I think in March, I stumbled upon something I never realized, although I'm so long into tech, that all of Google is basically one repository. So for people who are not technical, repository is technically folders and text files where all the code is. Yep. I think 2 billion lines of code. And then I also stumbled upon that you guys, in one podcast, someone mentioned that you have one major repository at OpenAI. So this is and I thought like that must be a very smart way to organize it. So what we did at Blackboat now is we have a huge repository called the Blackboat operating system, where apps are running, internal apps are running, the external website is running, like many things are running. Is this the way to organize I think of it in layers. I think in like one box is the repository where all the logic is. The second would be the layer of work conditions, meaning databases, clients, and stuff that you don't have in the repository. And then you have the agent layer working on that, or the human layer.
Yep.
Because the artifact in the end, the fourth layer, is just a PowerPoint presentation, the website, the code, the whatever it is. And you can then reconnect it to learn. So to me, this is the very simple way to think of it. Is it that clear or is it more messy? What is your best practice on that? For a company who thinks like, okay, how do I need to change?
Yeah, no, I think you're pointing like all the right things, and I think like monorepos have actually become quite popular now for many years at tech companies, even before AI was so good. And I think there are many properties that are like elegant about a monorepo. You oftentimes have like many teams working in like different products, especially like at large companies like Google that you mentioned and ours now, but many others. And I think oftentimes like you ship a new feature of an app, but it also requires an API update on a different service and everything. And like the orchestration across like dozens and dozens of repos is hard. So I think like the monorepo has this like nice property where like all the engineers can work collectively on one code base, even though they might actually touch like only a fraction of it. So interestingly, this was already becoming popular before AI, and AI and an army of agents are actually benefiting from that as well, because they have the complete picture of the whole code base, right? If there's one API change to make and one front-end change to make, it's all in one place, so they can see the whole picture. But I think that's right. I think it's the idea that like you have now empowered engineers, but also any kind of employees to do more by delegating to agents. And it's really this idea of like, okay, like what is the best way to structure the company so that these agents can do their best work. One thing, for instance, that I love is that like our company relies a lot on Slack. And I'm always telling my teammates, like, try to always avoid like private channels unless something is sensitive, of course, and has to be discussed in private, because everything else, like let's say a new idea for a project or a new prototype we're building, if it's all in public channels, I can simply ask Codex, hey, catch me up on that project. I have not had the chance in the past week to like figure out what was happening. Sure enough, like dozens of people have chimed in and like started to create documents or maybe some artifacts of code. Catch me up. What's the latest? What decisions have been made? What are the decisions still to be made? And I think that's cool because Codex can access all of these contexts too.
Is it that you have certain rules saying like, okay, this was Romain the human and this was Romain the agent, or how do you do it?
You mean like within Slack?
Yeah,
or?
like is there something? I'm like, I give you an example. I prepared an enablement internally that we will have within the next 2 weeks. And within one prompt, I prompted Codex and said, hey, well, I'm thinking of doing an enablement for the whole team, building agent harnesses, understanding in each domain how it works. I want you to inform my colleague from HR, my colleague from training, write them the email in my style, prepare the presentation, make it in HTML, upload it to our internal sites tool, just share it with the two of them, and just make them a note in the end that this whole thing was, even the find the dates in the calendar, set everything, and then quick note, it was done by Christoph the agent. That they realize it.
Exactly. So on Slack, it's already what's happening. So for instance, last night, I received a Slack from my colleague Jason, who was working on something over the weekend. And I saw this was like a note sent by his agent, because that's already part of the signature on Slack. Okay. I was like, all right. So he had been working on this thing. And I just noticed that like his agent, or Jason prompted his agent to give me an update about it. But I think what's even more powerful is not so much the writing, because that's usually like on Slack in a conversation manner. It's pretty rare that we use like an agent for this, except for like a small status update.
Yeah.
It's more for the context gathering, right? Like if I want to do my very best work, I got to build a very complex understanding of what's happening and keep the latest in my mind. And I think like Codex can really be magical for this.
A lot of people pointed to AI and did that and saying, okay, we become more efficient, and behind closed doors, I then get the question from top level years ago, who can we let go if we do that with AI? And I said, like, I think it's the wrong question to ask, because you usually don't have one task connected to one FTE. That's a very mathematical way of thinking, and the world is not like that. I said work is way more messy. I refer to it and say, how about you truly leverage the work? And I have the feeling with agent harnesses exploding in the last month, we now have the tool to do that. But what we also need on the other side is, once you give all the context on the stuff, is trust and security built around. And also, like, because I mean, in the end, it's trust that people buy when they relate on a company. Tell us a little bit about how you build it into the product, because I see these little nuances saying, okay, I can use the auto mode, and I know Codex asks for this and that. I, for example, also use, of course, I know Cursor quite well, I know Claude Code quite well, Pi, and so on, even OpenClaw and Hermes, like agents. And we experiment a lot on what is the model or the harness asking back if it comes to trust. How do you build it in the product? Because you guys go quite far with computer use, or what I read last night, even locked out, closed and locked out Mac that the model can use. But that's pretty new, I think. At least I saw on X working on a Mac.
Oh, when someone was talking to it from a phone?
Yeah, like from the phone, and then still use my Mac, even if it's at home, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You need a lot of built-in trust and security.
Yeah.
How does it work?
I think there's a few ways that we think about this. Well, first of all, like we care about safety. Like, it's paramount to us. Like, we want to make sure that everything we do and ship has to be like extremely safe for the users. That's why we also want to put like the technology in the hands of people all the time, as early and often as we can. But in the case of like Codex, first it starts with like the model intelligence, right? Like, with a model as smart as GPT 5.5, by default, the model kind of like is already very, very rigorous in its thinking and its chain of thought in terms of like using the right tools at the right time. But on top of that, you mentioned like auto review. I think that's what I recommend to most people to use actually by default, where like the model, when you are in this mode, will always operate in a sandbox, right? And it will always like execute these commands in a sandbox that are kind of like constraints to your project.
Sandbox to someone who's not a developer. So
So it's the idea that like instead of having like complete access to your entire OS and file system and everything, it will work on a limited scope by default. And only if and when the model or the agent might need more, it would ask for your permission, right? And that's very important to us. By the way, I think another interesting note on that point is that the way we designed this sandboxing is using a lot of the primitives that exist today on macOS, right? Because it's a Linux-based OS and has like a lot of the nice properties. But people were asking us a couple months ago, like, what is taking you so long to ship the Codex app on Windows? And now we did. Like, the Codex app works on Windows, but it took us a few weeks, even though it's the same code base as the Mac app. Well, the one and only reason we took longer was because we wanted to get Windows sandboxing right. The ability for the Windows users to also have the same properties and be able to have an AI agent that runs on their machine in a very safe way. And it turns out the Windows operating system does not have as many core primitives. And so we really wanted to get it right. Very, very complex architecture. But we wanted to spend the time there to make sure that people are like, oh, I installed the Codex app and now my hard drive is like everything has been deleted. That would be a terrible experience, right? So we wanted to get this sandboxing right. And so that's the sandbox keyword right there. And you also mentioned like computer use. So that's coming soon to Europe. It's something I'm the most impressed by in recent weeks. I'll show you a demo later if you have not seen it yet.
Yeah, for the ones listening now, we will do the demo and show it on YouTube. So that's where you can find it then, because I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think what is very magical about computer use and why does it even exist? Why do you need such thing? Well, we talked about the fact that you have like dozens and dozens of plugins where you can connect your sources online. We've talked about the fact that it can access with this like safe guardrails the files on your computer, whether it's writing code or an Excel sheet or something. But what if you would like your agent to complete a task for you and there's no like application for it and there's no API for it? But all there is to do, frankly, is like hundreds of copy and paste around different applications that live on your laptop. Well, that's exactly where computer use come into play. You can actually ask your agent and say, hey, could you open my iOS simulator, for instance? Can you like test my iPhone app on every possible screen size? Please feel free to click around and test screenshots all of this because I have no time to do it by myself, but go ahead and try. If there's any bugs, we should fix them and things like that. So it's very, very powerful because you can do QA, you can do all of these tasks, or even the toil that has to be part of your days. Well, once again, if you're asking such thing, computer use would ask you, are you okay with me taking control of your iOS simulator right now? And you'll be like, yes, just for this time. Yes, always, because that's an app that I don't really have any worries about. So at every step of the way, whether it's like connecting to a data source online, reading your files locally, or accessing apps on your computer, we try to have all of the right defaults and the right guardrails so that the user is always in control to say, yes, I'm approving this agent to use this app or read my files.
What are the heavy users, like when you talk about them doing at the moment? What did you see and where are they? Like, give us a little bit view into also like numbers of growth where you see Codex at the moment. I have a strong gut feeling. I'll share it in the company because we are independent from all the players, but we have a very close look at all of them. And I'm currently pushing the company a lot into heavy users and see that more and more of the people using it a lot use Codex. But like, what do you observe when you see heavy users and where are they typically?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like we've been very fortunate to see the growth like since the beginning of the year. I think on average, like since the beginning of this year, like the Codex growth has been multiplied by 8. And Germany is actually one of the top 5 markets in the world for Codex momentum.
Germany?
Yeah. Germany has done 10x on Codex momentum. It's growing really fast.
YouTube video.
I think AutoScout24, for instance, like we were talking to them like a week ago. They've deployed now like Codex to many parts of their company. More than 1,000 people use it, and great results. And I think like what's very interesting around the momentum is to see like on one side some of the very best engineers in the world, the most prolific engineers in the world now kind of getting into Codex or getting into GPT 5.5 to achieve very complex things. You know, of course, like Peter Steinberger from OpenClaw is one of the big Codex users, but I've seen many others like Michel Hashimoto from HashiCorp and Ghosty also moving to Codex. Many like top leading open source developers moving to Codex. But then at the same time, you also see the momentum on companies starting to adopt it very fast, right? Like it took us only 2 weeks to go from like 3 million users to 4 million users on Codex. And we can see the adoption of these tools.
4 million users weekly.
Yeah, on Codex now. Wow. And when you look at GPT 5.5, the model alone like was the fastest to adopt of any model launch. Like, you know, it was like 3x more used in the first week than any of our past models. So we can really see that we now have a combination of a product like Codex and a model like GPT 5.5 that is delivering real value for people. And we've seen, of course, like engineers are using it to like, you know, delegate complete tasks to Codex, like more and more complex tasks, even like they completely rely on it. But I think what I find very exciting too is this like, you know, number of people flocking to Codex and starting to use it for non-coding tasks. And so we've made the onboarding now much easier as a result of that. Because of course, if you're someone who's working on, you know, documents and spreadsheets and presentations, you don't really want to see like a Git diff or a pull request. You're like, I don't even know what this word means. I'm just trying to do work. And so we've completely reimagined the onboarding so that you have a very elegant interface.
You can
as
even
pure
toggle and say, don't show me the code.
Yeah, as pure as a ChatGPT interface. But what I find very exciting is that the Codex app is able to morph itself depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're generating an image and you're like, hey, I would like to have a new like image for the podcast. I would like to rethink the design. It should be something very visual. And by the time you love this design, maybe you're like, all right, GPT 5.5, take this design and make it happen. And boom, now it's like a coding task. But maybe you're going to be like, hey, I'd like to see the stats of viewership of my podcast. And all of a sudden it should be a graph, you know, like, and so we're trying to make sure that like the artifacts morph themselves depending on what you're trying to accomplish. That to me is like the real exciting part of Codex. It's an app that's kind of like universal for everyone.
Yeah, I saw it when I prepared the video that you can even choose your own colors now. I'm like, oh, I remember that moment with Slack back in the day when that comes. Yeah. So that really gave me the hint that you kind of prepare it to be the app. Are there any plans or anything you can share in order to make the experience like more one again or be more clear and say like people say, because you have agents now in ChatGPT, a little more playful? Not my personal style and preference, I have to say, but my people use it quite often. And then you have this more professional app. And when I explain it, I kind of, do you know the German company Bosch?
Of course.
They have the green Bosch for at home, the small, tiny one. I said, this is the ChatGPT. It looks nice. You can use it. It's easy. And there's this blue line, more powerful, you can carry around, more professional. This is how I explain these two. Is there a plan to like more merge it or anything you can share?
Yeah, I think like what I can share is like you now see kind of like on one side, we have the great fortune to have like 900 million active users of ChatGPT. And it's the brand that most people have, basically equalized to AI when they think about like a chat interface to like help them in their daily lives, personal lives or work lives. On a product that's like very powerful, but still essentially like connecting to your services online and for which you have a chat interface. And on the other side, you now have like a very fast growing product with Codex that has like now more than 4 million users on a weekly basis to do like any kind of work. But really this idea of like delegating tasks, Codex is like my teammate doing my work. I can like control all of these agents in one place. And you see that like on ChatGPT, you mentioned the agents. These are like agents you can share across a team. For now, Codex is still mostly single player. Also, you can create your agents, you can create your sub-agents inside Codex, but you're not quite easily able to share them with your team.
Yeah, we have them in the repo and then get access to that.
We should do something easier there. So obviously, like we want to make sure that there's a path onto which like users could benefit from both sides, right? And I think there are still many questions in flight, but we want to make sure that like when people are at work or doing anything on a computer, the power of the Codex app and the momentum we're having with it that's so amazing right now should benefit to many more users. And how do we progressively reveal some of that power to the people who are using ChatGPT? So it started already behind the scenes with a few steps, right? Like of course the models are now shared, by the way, which was not the case even 2 months ago, right? Like 2 months ago we had coding specific lines of models. We called it like GPT-3 Codex, right?
Exactly.
Meanwhile on ChatGPT you were maybe on GPT 5.2, so this was like a different lines of model. Now we've completely reunified that. As of GPT 5.4, the same exact models that are like so good are in both products.
Okay. So we won't see a dedicated 5.5 Codex.
We are now like on the main line where like all of the reinforcement learning techniques we've done for coding, and it turns out they're also benefiting any kind of task, are also in the same model where we're also making the personality improvements and things like that as a kind of conversational partner. Now, the second thing we've also made behind the scenes is that most of the new features, even all new features now in ChatGPT, are built on top of this Codex harness I mentioned. So not just the model itself, but like access to all of these tools. And so we now have this great foundation where like two products are sharing the same models and the same harness. And I think the ultimate goal is to think through like, what is the very best, most powerful experience we can give to any user at any given time? And how do we make sure that like someone in ChatGPT, like who's trying to accomplish some task, could have the power that we today only have in the Codex app, right? Because it has access to their files and things like this. So we're very much like thinking through that. I think there were a few steps along the way, but we're very excited to see the momentum on Codex, and we're very much thinking about how do we bring that power to many more people.
I'm definitely part of that, as I'm a little bit
you are,
on that.
You are,
but it's really good. It's really good. I have to admit. I wouldn't say it in a not sponsored podcast and video because you made a lot of effort here.
I appreciate that.
I have one last nerd topic I want to cover. I'm thinking a lot about security within the companies, and to the data nerds, there is this topic of SQL injection when it comes to databases, saying you separate the data you put into the rows and baskets from the ones that's structuring the database. The term prompt injection, which was coined by, who was it actually? Simon Wilson, I think.
I believe so.
I think so he did.
He talked about it.
He talked about it very early. And it means, or explaining to the people listening, when the model receives the message, it's not just the user message, but it always receives the system prompt and the user message as a so-called payload together. And this is by design, I think, and it's very hard to change that. Meaning, is the only way to have guardrails in a company that you build for yourself the way to put extra prompts in, or are there other ways you put into place to solve that? Is there anything that's known from the research side to work on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that happened, right? I think like before we had reasoning and the ability for the model to have a chain of thought, it meant that like everything inside the prompt, from the system prompt to the user message all the way down, was going to lead to the model creating tokens, right, as an output. And every token was committed to. So there was no going back. Like this was the response of the model, and you were kind of hoping for the best, and you could maybe inject something in there. What has really, really changed with the introduction of reasoning.
Yeah.
So starting with like our first series with O1, O3, and then ultimately this entire GPT-5 family, is that the models have a chain of thought and they're able to kind of like understand the query before committing to an output. And that has drastically lowered already the ability to do like injections and things like this, because the model is like, wait a second, why am I trying to do this thing? Is the user really asking for this? Because this seems like not the right thing to accomplish. So all of that has already changed like a lot. So that's one. And I think on top of that, I think when you're kind of like managing a product, a code base, or maybe like just like any kind of task at a company, we have like multiple products now that can help, right? Like I think, for instance, GPT 5.5 is outstanding at code reviews. So I really recommend companies who have not tried Codex yet, or maybe they're using different kind of products already today. I think I usually tell them like, turn on code review. Don't even change all of your tools just yet if you're not convinced, but turn on code review and see what happens. More often than not, they're like shocked by what they're discovering.
You posted that on X, right? That you can now also like put it in your Claude code.
Yeah, I mean, like, why not, right? Like, that's my team who did this. We thought, well, you know, we're in this fortunate position where like we live in this industry where the tools are so great. And of course, Codex is an amazing tool, but there are some other great tools out there. And so we thought like, there's no point in trying to convince someone who likes their tool today to like force them to change. What I thought was more interesting is the ability for them to have a quick taste of what's on the other side, right? So if you're using another tool today, but if you want to have a taste of Codex, could it find some bugs? Could it find anything compelling in your code base that gives you a taste of what the model can do, right? Especially something as powerful as GPT 5.5. We've had companies like Datadog, for instance, that kind of actually replayed all of their past incidents with code review, and they were able to notice like that a pretty big fraction of these incidents could have been avoided by simply turning on code review. Codex would just have found these bugs. And I remember this, I think it was like one incident out of 4 would have been avoided, but this was like 3 months ago. So 3 generations of GPT-5 models ago, I'm pretty sure by now, like 5.5 most likely would have caught more than half, you know? And so I think that there are these things. And, you know, we can also do like, with GPT 5.5, we also like encourage people to use it for code review, but also for scanning for vulnerabilities in their applications, like making sure that like everything is safe and robust. And for the very most sophisticated actors, maybe let's say like in the banking system, if you really want to battle test your code base and your products, and if for some reason GPT 5.5 will sometimes refuse to like red team really hard something because you're literally putting yourself in the shoes of a hacker trying to hack your own product, we also have GPT 5.5 Cyber, which lets you actually red team. So you have to be a trusted actor on this one.
It's a special product made for that.
Yeah, it's not so much that the capabilities are vastly different. That's not the case. It's more about like the refusals and what can it let you go do to bypass some safeguards, because we trusted you as a safe actor. You're actually trying to red team your own financial system, for instance. So like that's thing. And so we have this like now umbrella that you might have seen a week ago, like Daybreak. So this kind of like collectively is our suite of like security products. So broadly speaking, on the theme of security, I think like if we were to summarize, there's like the models are far more intelligent than they used to be. And I think as such, like their chain of thought and the reasoning capabilities make it much less likely to be like, injecting things in prompts, like leading to the wrong outcome. But also when you start turning on a lot of these like security features and really leveraging the model's capabilities for your own good, protecting your products, your features, your users, your database, you can really, really go a long way to have something that's really robust.
Nice, very nice. Is there anything that comes to your mind where I have a blind spot that I forgot you to ask and I should foresee it when I think of agents throughout the next year?
Wow. I mean, we could talk for hours about this topic, so it's hard to find one. Maybe one thing that has been my kind of like sparkle of like filling the AGI in the past couple of weeks that we could close on, given how big of a deal that is, but I think people have not really used it yet. It's this command that we introduce in Codex called /goal. And I find it quite compelling because it's the simplest thing you could imagine for people listening. At the core, the idea is to give Codex with this command goal a goal. So what does that mean? Well, you could have an extremely, extremely ambitious goal. And it could be like, hey, I have these like 10 millions of lines of code that have not been touched in the past 5 years. I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure dependencies are out of date. I'm pretty sure there are some security vulnerabilities in there. And I have no engineer to work on that, but I'm pretty worried. Can you go ahead and migrate this whole thing end to end and make sure it's completely polished? That's the goal. And what will happen next is that GPT 5.5 would relentlessly pursue that goal until it's complete and would not be like interrupted along the way. It's very likely it could work for like 1 day, 2 days, maybe 3 days or more, completely uninterrupted, and come back to you with like, I'm done. Everything is up to date and I tested everything.
I switched it on a couple of days ago. It's for people listening. To me, it was a little bit still a hack. Going into the Codex CLI,
right?
Switching on /experimental, and then I could choose goals,
right?
And now I could tell it in the UI. So I'm pitching for you to have a special toggle there, switching to goals and see that. Because what I find interesting, this is something that brings together psychology of humans, being able to set goals, which is not an easy thing, to an intelligence that also does not know, like, I know when the goal is reached, it needs to be like kind of measured, right? And I guess the model will then figure with some agents, am I there yet? Am I there yet? Am I there yet?
And once again, calling their tools to make sure the work is completed correctly. If not, they'll come back.
They come back.
And try again.
Oh, okay.
And so we are now making this like goal, obviously very elegant in the Codex app as well. You'll be able to like use goal as, like without leaving the Codex app. It already works today, but like we're gonna make the UI even better. But what I find fascinating about this is that for people listening, I think it's to me like one of these frontiers where like you're really starting to rethink what these models are able to accomplish. Like how many companies, I'm sure many of those listening, maybe all of them, have a backlog of bugs.
Oh yeah.
That like you have to fix.
Or work that you never touched because it just, nobody's there can do it.
Imagine there's like 50 bugs sitting in your backlog that you have to fix, but they're not that big a deal just yet. So no one was able to prioritize these bugs. Well, you can also connect, as we said, Codex your tools. So maybe it's linear, maybe it's Jira, maybe it's something else. But what if you say one evening, /goal, Codex, can you pick up all of these bugs that we triaged this week and they're all flagged with this particular label of, I don't know, UI polish or something like that. Crush them all. I'm going to bed. I want to wake up tomorrow morning with a bug-free application. I mean, chances are, maybe it's not going to be flawless yet, but chances are Codex will be able to solve completely a very large majority of these bugs. And I'm like, wow, this is quite incredible. Like the ability in just like one command, which is like, take this up, that like Codex will gather the context, traverse the code base multiple times, checks its own work, calls some tools, and actually deliver that.
I tested it on my Apple's Reminders app because I have a list of ideas for later that's beyond 100 points. And I gave it like 5 of these saying, okay, goal, can you kind of do something with that? And it worked quite well. I was quite amazed that it like took the Apple reminders and said like, oh, pull it in, and I like figure a plan. And but I only tested this for a couple of days. I'm not there yet to say like really deep dive into that. But that's a good point. I almost forgot about that. So
and I think like one thing that I noticed for myself, and I think that I'm sure is the case for most listeners, is that those models are so good that we're still too shy with them. We're still not using them to the maximum of their abilities, right? And I think to me, like setting an ambitious goal is a reminder, like, damn, yes, that's true. We can actually send these very complex goals and these very complex tasks. And when you start seeing Codex and GPT 5.5 do so well with those, you're like, okay, I can trust this model for much more than I thought. I can actually delegate now most of the toil in my day-to-day, preparing for meetings, catching me up. I can actually prepare customer conversations because I can let Codex do like trustworthy research on each of them. I trust the code being written more and more. And like now it frees up time for like, okay, I want to be more creative. I want to think about like more problems my customer have. Well, like what else could I solve for them? And so it's really like freeing up some of your time by building that trust so you can do more on the side, which I find compelling.
So that was, I could go on for hours, as you said, with you and then continue that conversation. Or we do a second round next year and say where we are there and then we compare. I would say that would be very interesting.
Yeah, so, I'm sure it might have to be like sooner than a year.
Yeah, probably is.
At the pace of everything changing this fast, like I'm sure things are going to get very exciting in a few months.
Very happy to come to Paris again. And
next time I'll meet you.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I'm overdue to go to Germany.
Okay.
I lost most of my German that I practiced in school, but maybe
then let's get back to that. So thank you very much for giving us that insight and taking the time.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Christoph. Amazing conversation.
And for everyone now who's still excited and listening, we are now switching to a demo on YouTube and showing how Romain himself is using Codex. And you can switch to YouTube for that.
Thank you.